Friends, welcome to our weekly Data Talk, a show where we talk with data science leaders from around the world. This is a very, very special episode because it's dedicated to two things that I love, hip hop and data science. We're going to talk about how they merge in this conversation with Emily Hough-Kovacs. She's a data scientist at Spotify, formerly at Tumblr. Emily, I am super, super excited to chat with you today.
I am equally psyched to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So this is a blast. So I want to give everyone kind of some background on how this actually happened. So I ride my bike a lot and I listen to Spotify and I have a lot of different hip hop playlists. I love hip hop music. It motivates me, helps me bike harder. So I was like thinking about Data Talk, the show, and upcoming episodes that we could do. And meanwhile, listening to like J. Cole, Kendrick, Ruslan, a bunch of other people. And then it kind of like hit me like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do something around data science and hip hop? And I wonder like who's talking about that. And so I immediately like Googled it. And the first article I saw was an article about you in the blog from This is Medus.
Totally.
And it was basically like your story. I just like, this is awesome. This is fascinating. I got to talk to Emily. And so then I reached out to you. So before we get started, can you kind of share a little bit about your journey in data science and how it kind of led to what you're doing now?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned Medus because that is a huge component of my data story and my hip hop story, to be honest. But that's sort of jumping in the middle. So I'll probably take you back just in university and where I was thinking back then. So I guess, I mean, even as a kid, I've always been what I would call lovingly a nerd. I love math. Just science. And I always kind of thought I wanted to be a scientist, but I didn't know, do I want to do chem, physics, bio? So in college, I just went straight for math. But as I got into the kind of more advanced pure math, I realized that wasn't really giving me the applications I wanted and needed to do kind of more hands-on in the lab sort of stuff. So I had this like aha moment that taking a computer science class would make my math homework go a lot faster. I wouldn't have to do all of these problems by hand anymore. I could just code something up to run it for me. So I was very lucky. I went to Barnard College and there they have a combined major in math and computer science. So I graduated with that and got an internship at Etsy, the online retailer for handcrafted goods.
I love shout out to Etsy. They're a fantastic e-retailer. I love all the crafts. We buy from them all the time. Yeah, shout out to Etsy. Love them.
And they're just really great because also you support, homemade things and small businesses. So I loved Etsy too. I loved my time there. They're just down in Brooklyn.
So were you like, is this in between school? When you're working
So right after graduation, I kind of didn't have an easy time finding a full-time job right away. And my friend suggested the idea of just, taking a summer internship the way you would in between 2 years in college, but just right after graduation. And a lot of these roles, I think if you're a new data scientist looking to get into things or just a new grad in general, this is kind of a life hack of a lot of places, including Spotify, almost look more for seniors who have just graduated for their internships in preference to juniors or sophomores because they're looking to hire for their pipeline, right? So
yeah,
a lot of companies really look for open roles and they want to hire out of that talent.
I think that's a really good tip because I was actually chatting with somebody here and she was just finishing up her internship and she was saying that so often when she was looking for jobs, so many jobs are like they're looking for somebody who has 2 to 4 years experience.
Exactly.
And when you're just getting out of college, you're like, well, how do I then get my first job if I'm going to need 2 to 4 years experience? And then in the data science world, I even saw a post recently where they were saying that they want you to have like 5 to 8 years experience in specific machine learning software. And
that wasn't invented 5 to 10 years
Yeah, exactly. It's only been around 2 years.
Yeah.
And so there's like this
that shows a lack of awareness on their part too of like, okay, what do you really want? But I totally remember that struggle and that experience earlier on in my career. And that was just such a great tip that I got from someone I would consider a mentor, who was actually a friend of mine and a peer as well, who she convinced me to take my first computer science class. She was in my study groups, and she was the one who said, hey, Emily, I think this data analyst role would really be a better fit for you in some ways than going into like an engineering role that a lot of my peers in the computer science program were doing, because you have that edge of math. And I was like, data analyst, like I never heard of that, didn't know what it was. Why not? I'll try it out. And this was in 2014. So the term data scientist hadn't really caught on as a buzzword as much. And a lot of places had insights teams or business intelligence teams. And that was really the term that we were looking for around that time.
What was that process? I know a lot of people right now are going to be graduating in June, looking for their first internship or their first job. What was that that interviewing process? What was that like for you? You know, just getting out of academia, going in to your first interview with Etsy for a really great data role. What was that? What did that feel like? What was that process like?
Oh man, it's been so long. I probably couldn't remember the exact interview. So I can't say what sort of questions they asked, but I do remember that it's tailored for people in that stage of their career development. So I think people were definitely very understanding with me. And one thing that really struck me at that internship was I didn't have any prior experience with SQL. And now SQL is a tool that I use every day in my work. I probably wouldn't be able to survive 10 minutes without it. And I was just saying today to a recruiter who helps us find data scientists that someone without SQL would really have a hard time here starting right off the bat. So to me, it's mind-boggling now to think like, oh, wow, I don't know how I even like walked into the office like that. And I think that really goes to show how much the internship was a growth opportunity, and they wanted to curate someone who they saw had the passion, had the drive, had the logical thinking and problem solving skills, and just natural curiosity and interest in like puzzles and like finding out the solution. And so I think that those kind of questions will be the kinds of questions to expect are, how do you think? And do you ask the right kind of questions to understand what's being asked of you and how you can figure it out? Because it's never a problem to ask for help. What would be more like worrisome is if someone doesn't really seem to know that they can ask for help or doesn't know what to ask.
Yeah, what would be your advice for someone who's choosing an internship, choosing a company or a team to work on? What are some other aspects of a good internship that they should be looking for? And if they're not getting it, maybe they should be looking elsewhere.
I would say that one thing that you can be very direct when you're negotiating, maybe after you get your offer or even before when you're interviewing, and ask them straight out, are you guys looking to hire after this internship? Is this an intern to hire program? Or do you have associate or junior roles in your company? Most companies, if they are the kind that is looking for that pilot program, will be thrilled to hear that you are taking that initiative and want to have a true investment in the company as not just something you're trying to hit and run from. Yeah, that's really, really good.
Okay, so you went through this internship at Etsy, which sounded like a great team to be part of. You were being challenged. You were like learning new skills, growing. What were you thinking towards the end of the internship? Where was your mind at?
Right. So definitely throughout the entire summer, I spent a lot of my time, as I mentioned, onboarding to skills. I was very lucky at the time to have folks in that team who really wanted to take me under their wing and expose me to the types of projects that they were working on and the business cases related to the types of data questions that we had. I think at that stage in my development, I wasn't ready to really notice what they were trying to guide me into. And I wish if I could go back and do anything else to have taken that opportunity to really see that they were actually offering me to take take my wings and fly as much as I wanted to. They said, here's a huge project for you. We don't have the answer scoped out. We want to hear, like, what do you think how we should approach this? So if you see those moments ever in your career, take them and run with them, because that, to someone who hasn't had that offered to them before, it can seem like people are just throwing something at you that you just really can't handle. But what that means is it's a sign of trust, and that's your stepping stone to a promotion, to an offer, and those are just really big moments.
I think that is like excellent advice. Looking for those opportunities as you're networking, meeting people in your organization, and you hear about business challenges, business problems, and they're saying, hey, do you want to be part of this? Do you want to huddle and talk more about this and get involved? Like, huge opportunity. But you're right, especially when you're early on in your career, you don't realize how important some of those projects or discussions are, because you're so focused on, I want to do a good job in my internship. I want to make sure my boss is really happy.
I wanted to like tick those boxes, but I didn't see that where those boxes were. And seeing those more open-ended projects really where it would have lied, I think. So towards the end, I was very interested in seeing, is there an open role? Is there an opportunity? And it didn't pan out at Etsy. I don't know. I can't say if that was the contributing factor or if they simply didn't have availability. But I was also looking for other roles at the time. Towards time in August, it was a great place to intern. Just shout out again to Etsy, because they said, you can take half a day, you can take your time, go off and interview other places. Like, we know that this can grow. So they were very open to letting me use my work hours to do what I need to get done on that path.
I think that's excellent.
So just at the end of August, I wrapped up my internship at Etsy, and I hit the ground running. I think I took Memorial Day or Labor Day weekend was September 1. And 3 days later, I was first day of job at Tumblr. So that was quick,
really? That fast?
Transition. Yeah.
Wow. Wait. So tell me what happened there, because that's a quick move.
Yeah. I think I probably found the job online, I want to say. But I remember a flurry of things senior year as well as that summer, going to job fairs, resume building classes with my career counseling department, just making use of anything and everything that I could find. Going in New York City, there's a lot of, I want to say WeWork, but that's the co-working space. Meetups that people go to. I think that's a really active space for data science. There's Python groups, there's data science groups, there's data science for ethics, and all of those communities will have summits and conferences, and a lot of times there's discounts for students too, or they're even free if there are pilot programs. So those things were just great opportunities. And I hate the word networking, but just to chat and like see what kinds of things are going on in that space. And I think in terms of networking, if I were to give advice on that front, is definitely don't think of it as like a cocktail party. I have to have the right questions. Like, I have to know how to dress and who to talk to and what to say. More so, I would go in with an open sense of curiosity. If you truly are passionate about this and you are just like soaking up the talks, go up to the speaker afterwards, say, hey, I really enjoyed your talk. It really got me thinking. And Mike, you even did this to me in your email. You were like, hey, this link, like, what do you think of this? This looks so cool. Like, I would love your take. And I love that now. And I think anybody who's engaging and, like I said, kind of nerdy would remember you more than someone who's just maybe trying to like suck up a little bit. So that definitely helps you get your foot in the door more.
I love that. What would be your advice for those of us who maybe are more reserved, more introverted? Like, we see conference or meetup, we're kind of horrified at the thought of like going to a place with a lot of strangers.
Yeah, totally. That's very fair. First of all, I would still push you to get out of your comfort zone as much as possible. I know that's hard. First, start by just going to them, attending. If you don't make any contacts or even talk to anybody you don't know, that's totally fine. But it's getting used to the space and it also helps you get a sense of, do you really like this material? Is this, you know, you really have a chance when you're in your early 20s and your early career path to explore, and especially in data science, do I want to go into health tech? Do I want to go into fintech, like product development, so many different things. So seeing what strikes your fancy can help, even if you don't talk a single word that day, don't interact with the speakers directly. That being said, they always give their contact info. So if doing it offline, following up, sending them a tweet, sending them an email is easier, that's also always possible. And the third thing I would say is, and I'll probably say this for everyone, is, you know, making sure that you keep an active presence yourself. So online, you know, I think you probably have heard, keeping your social media up to date, tweeting and retweeting things of those conference attendees that you see, but also having your own blog posts. If you do get a chance to do projects or participate in competitions, those are the kinds of things that recruiters really like to see, that you're active and just take an interest.
I think that shows like extra passion and shows the grittiness factor, that you are not only working in the field or want to work in the field, but that you have something else. You have that grit. You want to keep learning. You're passionate. You're thinking things through. You're writing about topics that are new to you and trying to journal that learning so you can bring other people in. I think that's a really crucial part. And I love your advice about really thinking about it not as like the networking term, but more like getting exposure to things that you might not otherwise get a chance to see, job roles, and also building relationships with people that you otherwise wouldn't encounter.
Yeah, exactly.
I love the fact that you're just very intentional about looking for meetups, looking for meeting other people in data science, and then you end up getting that position very quickly at Tumblr. Now, before you get into the Tumblr work, Emily, it's extremely hard to even get your resume in the right hands at very, very busy big companies like Etsy, like Tumblr. What do you think helped make you stand out to recruiters?
You know, I think what it was is it did end up being in the end a personal connection. I remember with Etsy, the reason my friend, who I mentioned was a mentor to me in college, recommended this particular role was not only was it a data analyst role that she thought would be a good fit, was I think she had a contact at Etsy. And once I kind of like blew her off, I was like, okay. And then 2 weeks later, I was like, where's that LinkedIn? And we went on the website and it had actually been taken down. And she reached out to this man, and I remember now he was a recruiter. He was recruiting for that actual role. And she said, look, this girl, Emily, is great. She's a good friend of mine. I've seen her code, and she's super passionate, you know, and gritty. So is there anything we can do? And he was then on the email thread with me directly. And that personal connection always helps. You know, someone vouching for you
totally
makes a world of difference. We just recently at an internal conference at Spotify was talking about the power of not just mentorship, but sponsorship. And as someone who might be unfamiliar with this topic, if you're looking for a sponsor, it can be very difficult to think like, where would this even come from? But what a sponsor is someone who isn't just someone to guide you in your development career, but someone to vouch for you. So someone who is like my mentor I mentioned is at the same peer level as me. And a sponsor is almost always someone who's a leader, an executive or a director, or just someone who's at least one stage along further in their career, who is going to be in those meetings where you aren't allowed in, but they can take your work and represent your work on your behalf. And that's what makes the difference in promotions and getting those visibility where you wouldn't otherwise be seen.
I think that's extremely valuable advice. I'm thinking especially for the young data scientists there who they're wanting to move up in the company. They want to get into maybe leadership roles, but sometimes you are so busy doing the work and you're keeping your head down and just doing great work, but you may not be getting the recognition that you think you deserve, but you're too humble to say anything. So you're like, I'm gonna just do my work, make my boss look really good, and hopefully that will help me in my career. But to your point, you have to be building relationships with other leaders in the organization. They need to get exposure to you. They need to know who you are. So when her name is brought up, it's like, oh, I know Emily. I talk to her in the hallway. I see her from time to time. We chat about different things. And so when leaders do mention your name, like, oh yeah, or when a new opportunity is available, they can be like, oh, you know what? I talked to Emily about something like this. I wonder if she'd be interested in this role.
Exactly.
That's how things happen. That's how things happen.
That's totally right. And it's just it's about balancing your hard, I guess some people would say, hard skills of your data science work, heads down time to really code and put your project together, with those collaborative and communication skills that I think all of us as data science unicorns, we've heard the term, have to have. You mentioned being an introvert versus being an extrovert, and it is true that these are all different challenges that we can have, and different people are more comfortable with certain aspects of our role. But it truly is kind of a unicorn role in the sense that you're going to be talking to, whether it's product managers or advisors, or if you're lucky, company executives and directors, to give them the feedback and insights and opinions that you have derived from your work. So you do have to have this great balance of being able to communicate with people and share what you've been working on, as well as those hard skills to get it done and be confident in the quality of your work.
That's right. That's right on. Your transition to Tumblr, tell us about that. What was that like for you?
Totally. So Tumblr was my first real job, I guess, full-time job. And as a young person starting out in this field, it was just super exciting to get to be somewhere that has a youthful audience, has a youthful culture. It was kind of like the dream of all the things that tech companies are, free snacks, free drinks, like rooftop lounge. And it was just a really great chance to be, again, with people who are so passionate about the work they do. So that has been like the key thing actually at both my jobs at Tumblr and Spotify, that the biggest pleasure and like the greatest reason to come into work every day is that the people that you're with are super whip smart, super experts in their field, and just love what they do and care deeply about their product. I think every Tumblr, or like every person who worked at Tumblr, was an active Tumblr user themselves. They want to see the product get better. So for the entire time I was there for 12, 13 months, it was just a blast to be surrounded by that kind of positive energy. I would say as for the work front, it was a pretty small, scrappy data science team that had the challenges of dealing with both the product development, which is really giving feedback on the app, the website, how do we improve, whether it's the search page or the home feature or the feed, as well as giving business level reports, sometimes reporting even to the board of directors of Yahoo, the monthly active users numbers, and wow. Really high level things that for a junior employee, I think that was probably the biggest challenge that I encountered.
What did you learn about doing presentations or the communicating the top line information to executives? Because that's sometimes extremely difficult for somebody who's brand new and trying to make sure that I'm communicating the right things and not giving them something that they're not interested in.
Totally. So one rule that I like to keep in mind, just in presentations in general, is kind of counterintuitive. You usually think, okay, you want to walk us through a story that's very clear, beginning, middle, and end. The difference is when it comes to an executive summary, there's not a lot of time, and you want to make sure that the attention at the very beginning is getting to the core of whatever you're trying to tell them. So you always want to include an executive summary slide almost as soon as you can, just so people know what is it that we're walking out of this meeting to take away from. Of course, you want to set the stage and give whatever background information needs to be brought, but then really sum it up in a concise way. And those kind of slides are usually about the figures, the facts, and the takeaways. The part that I think maybe your question was getting at that I think is really interesting is how does a data scientist dealing with extremely technical questions and sometimes very complex models describe and unpack those for maybe a less technical audience? And this question is so important because an executive doesn't want to make a decision that is going to vastly impact their company's direction or their revenue stream if they can't understand the why or validate that to their board or to their stakeholders. But on the other hand, as we all know, not all models have an exact answer for why. It's not always easy to unpack that black box. So just giving as many caveats as are necessary and explaining this is how far we can take this, or this is the methodology that was used without making it too convoluted and going into the weeds is just what's necessary to get to the core of it.
It takes a lot of skill, a lot of practice to be able to boil everything down into a very concise statement. But if we're able to do that, like that's a tremendous value to an executive for them to hear your perspective on something, hear the challenges, hear the opportunities. And sometimes you don't have all the data to be able to make a decision. You have to make a decision, but you may not have all the facts, all the data points to be able to say, yes, we know 100% this is the right way to go. Sometimes it's like, yeah, we gotta, this seems right-ish. Like, let's head in this direction. We'll get some data points along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as data scientists, maybe we have a tendency to sometimes be almost overly cautious in that sense. I definitely understand that because we are more data inclined people, we want people to know every caveat that there is there and say, look, no model is 100% precise. There's no way for me to really know, and I'm not a fortune teller, I'm a data scientist. And I think what people need to know is product leaders and influencers and executives in your company are going to be understanding of that. They know that nothing's for certain and they can't see the future either. So what they're really trusting you for as the expert is to provide that data-driven insight and make a recommendation on their behalf. And then they can do with it what they want. You know, they're not bound to it. But you have to, at some point, let go of that fear that it's not going to be perfect and trust that you've done the best work that you can.
I love that. And it reminds me of like when you're writing papers in college where you have your thesis, you have your summary of the research, and then at the very, very end, you have all the limitations.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. But that transparency is like key.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you're not going to leave it out. And you can definitely have an appendix. You can have people, for those who want to go further into detail, here's my contact info. I've added this at the end of the slide. You know, do your due diligence and link to it. And then also just have the takeaways.
That's cool. So it sounds like Tumblr was another amazing experience for you.
So Tumblr definitely was a huge learning experience for me. And I have to say it was some of the most fun times of my life. And I definitely just grew so much as a person and as a data scientist. However, I was let go from Tumblr, and that was something that was really hard for me in my journey. The first time you're fired from somewhere, you really start to question yourself. I was let go for performance reasons, and I was told some things that were really hurtful too. Some of the delivery that my manager used made me feel like I had to question myself rather than just being able to hold it to that time period. And the imposter syndrome is real no matter what's going on. So to have that confirmed would be, it's kind of like the nail in the coffin. And then on top of that, it's your first job. So it's kind of like at that point, I mean, that was probably the lowest point in my career and one of the lowest points, honestly, in my adult life, to be frank. I kind of had to pull myself up by the bootstraps, cry it out and say, what next? And that was rough. So I would absolutely say for anyone who ever goes through something similar, first of all, you have to contextualize the situation. you're not the only one to get fired from a job. There could be extenuating circumstances. There might not be the resources available to have as many staff as they thought, reorgs, et cetera. And then on the part that you do need to take accountability for, you just have to kind of, be gentle with yourself and then strategize. And that's kind of where I went into was strategy mode. Okay, what was it that I didn't live up to? Where do I need to grow? And what are the next steps in what I can do to make sure that I really hit it out of the park next time?
Yeah, being let go is extremely painful because, to your point, it can rock your entire world. It shakes you. And then when it impacts who you think you are, because you're right, so many of us suffer from imposter syndrome. And then to have that happen to us just says, see, that negative mindset of like, you're not worthy to do this. Who do you think you are? All of a sudden, and that voice comes in and goes, see, I told you, if you would have listened to me and never even tried, you wouldn't be in that situation. And that's like that fear mindset that actually, as holds us back, and we have to like disregard that all the time if we want to do anything that's going to be interesting and innovative. We constantly got to fight that. So how did you get through that piece? Because that is, I feel like whether you get laid off or not, things are going to happen in the workplace that are going to shake you up. And it could be leadership transitions happen. All of a sudden new bosses come in, new leadership comes in, and all of a sudden you're like, well, everything I'm doing is now going to be questioned. It's going to be looked at. If your boss leaves, you get a new boss, you're like having to basically start over in building trust. And this is like, that's stuff that's out of our control. That kind of stuff can happen at any point.
Totally. And it's universal. Change is an aspect of life, it's always going to happen. And I think to that point, I would probably say one note, and this is something I didn't do, to safeguard a little bit when it comes to reorgs within the company. Always write down your accomplishments. Keep just like a journal or a Google Doc or whatever, where you can see what exactly you can point to. And this is helpful then if you decide to leave the company when you're revamping your resume, you can just pull those bullet points out really easily instead of being like, gee, what did I do in the last 2.5 years? Or whether it's just simply your new boss and you were up for a promotion and now you're like, do I have to start all over again? No, absolutely not. You can come to them and say, look, this is what I know you weren't here, but this is the impact I've had, and these are the people who can vouch for it. So keeping that little personal development doc, and just no task is too small. Anything that you personally experience as a win, anything you've gotten good feedback on, just keep that in there. And the other thing that serves for is just personal empowerment. You can go back to that whenever you want and be like, hey, I really did do something. It wasn't all for nothing. So make sure you keep that with you everywhere you go.
I think that's great advice. One of my friends, Brian Fanzo, he says, screenshot all your wins. Like every day something's happening, an email, something happens on Twitter, you get some recognition, or something you did, have made an impact. You saw a news story, like screenshot all that. Remember all the things you're doing. I think that's great advice, and it helps to fight off that imposter syndrome.
You totally have to be your biggest cheerleader. That's true. And again, going back to the point of your personality, that might be very foreign to some of us who have just never thought about like advocating for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely an unusual concept, and I know there are cultural differences. In our Western culture, it's a lot more common to be an individualistic person and stand up for yourself. So if that's not your nature or if that's not your culture, it's definitely going to be more of a transition. And I think that it's fair for you to be like, wait, this isn't something that I necessarily feel comfortable with right away. So dip your toes in and start thinking more about how you can be your own cheerleader.
That's great advice. So you leave Tumblr and you're kind of like, okay, I'm starting over.
Yeah.
I'm going to, what were you, as far as data science roles, what were you thinking at that point?
So I'm going to be really frank with you. before I was even thinking that, I went into survivalistic mode. I am kind of a self-made person. I don't come from a background where I have a lot of money. And I, like many of you guys, had a huge pile of student loans that was due every single month, New York rent that was due coming the next month. And I was kind of like putting myself on a deadline. I'm like, this is live or die, you know? And I think I probably dramatized it more than I was healthy, because that's not a productive way of thinking. But it was kind of coincidentally and luckily right around Christmas time. I think I want to say maybe 8 weeks before Christmas. So what I did do was I went home, sublet out my place in New York for a few months, and I actually just got a job at the local mall, and just to have a stream of income and something to kind of get me off the couch and not looking at the computer screen, going through endless resume builder sites, and kind of circling the whole time. I could think about something else and just feel like I had something to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's that resetting process of like, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to move out of this area that I was hurt by. Get reorganized. Do something else while I kind of process through this pain.
Yeah. So that definitely gave me the time to evaluate all options. From there, I didn't have to think, do I want to just take any old job that's thrown at me? I thought maybe I could go to grad school. Maybe I could see if I could travel. I don't know. And one thing that finally came up that I had never really thought about was a boot camp. And this leads me to the Medus that I had mentioned earlier. So Medus is a data science bootcamp. It's a 12-week intensive, full-time, 9 to 6, and oftentimes until
really
midnight doing homework, sort of program 5 days a week, in New York, Chicago, San Francisco. I want to say they've expanded further since I did it 3 years ago. So it's a really great program. This is metis.com if you guys want to check it out. And honestly, it was the best thing that's ever happened to me. Taking that leap, and it was actually a really funny story how I found out about it. I had been making some edits to my LinkedIn, and that always perks people up. The recruiters start coming out of the woodwork. And someone reached out to me with some fabulous 6-figure number that I was like not prepared for in the line of the email, saying, would you like to teach a data science program? And I had done some high school summer camps in college where I taught up and coming students some basics of coding. So I was like, I can do this. I went to find out more, and I read it and realized, actually, I think I could benefit from being the student in this program, less than the teacher. They ended up telling me after I was accepted, they said, I think, Emily, you're the only person who was simultaneously in the teacher and the student by the same time. So that was just kind of hilarious. But yeah, so it was super fun. There was pre-work, and I think if you're just like finishing up maybe your first or second job and you've spent some time in school, it's nice to get a chance to get back into that classroom environment. But what Medus specifically as a bootcamp provided was so much hands-on time. So classwork was only in the morning, and in the afternoons, we spent that time working either in group projects or on guided projects that eventually became more and more self-directed. So the first one had very specific questions, a very specific like solution that we were looking for, and there was almost like a right or wrong answer, although it was still using machine learning techniques. And by the end, we got to design and implement our own kind of question and solve it in our own way. And each of these gave us an opportunity to share that, keep up a blog, keep up an online presence, and really start doing those kind of projects that I was talking about earlier, which as a student, I found impossible to make extra time for on top of all my other responsibilities.
Yeah, that is I love the fact that you just like went in, just dove into this really intensive program to just keep building your skills and also meet more people, which is building your network and then just getting your mind back into the data work. For those that are listening in that are maybe thinking about doing a boot camp, when you go online, you type in like data science boot camp, there's like a laundry list, right?
Hmm.
Hundreds. So what would be your advice for choosing a good boot camp?
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, I obviously hands down would recommend Metis to anyone who has that opportunity, just because it was such a fabulous experience for me. I think some of the things about Metis that really stood out were, number one, a fantastic career counseling program. We had a dedicated career counselor. She would offer us sessions. She had mock interviews that were mandatory, that she brought in real data scientists in the industry to give us interviews. She would prep us for them. We had to do mock interviews with each other.
Wow.
She tore our resumes apart, sent them back to us, made us start over. And that was just a blessing. So that was number one, is this amazing career program that also helps get a lot of us into jobs. So what kind of network do they have? I had seen that Medus had already hired, Medus graduates had already been hired by BuzzFeed and IBM and lots of other great companies. So that was just a great indicator to me, like, obviously this program is working. So that seems to go both to speak to the fact that they have connections and they have a network themselves that you can draw on, not only as a student and a recent graduate, but now as an alumna of that program. I'll always have a connection to that network. And finally, I think the third question that I asked this question as well when I was considering Medus, what should I think about with a boot camp? I have no idea. And someone told me, ask them, do they get paid by the companies to place you with those companies? Or how do they get paid? Because some programs, there are different ways in which you can pay for a data science bootcamp. But one of them, which I thought was really interesting, was that they would take a certain percentage of your first year's salary. So this, I think, is a really cool idea, because it means that the bootcamp company is going to have a vested interest making sure all their students get hired, because you don't get a job, they don't get paid, and the higher salary you get, the more they get for you. So
That's right.
That was really cool. And Metis didn't do that. They instead offered a loan program to help cover their cost. But I thought that was really cool to hear that there are different ways that the relationship between yourself as a participant, the boot camp, and the potential companies that will hire the graduates, how do they work?
So now, so you go through the boot camp and you have all these intensive, discussions with your different team partners and working on big projects, and you're just like busy all day long and working on projects at nighttime. You finish the boot camp. Now what happens?
Actually, about halfway through is when we were asked to start the application process. And
okay.
A little bit different for everyone, depending on how aggressive your search was. Again, like I said, money and time was a constraining factor for me. So I was starting to think about looking at who I want to talk to beforehand. And I still had some leads that I could follow up on from before, when I had done a little bit of emailing and cold submitting of resumes. So one of those places had been BuzzFeed, and the recruiter had gone back to me, said, we reviewed I actually did a take home, and they said, we reviewed your take home, not quite a great fit just yet. And I said, you know what, that's fine. I actually just got into Medus. Why don't we talk in 3 months? So I put it off and I put it in their court, and they said, that's great. We've hired someone from Medus, so we'll talk later. So I resumed that discussion. But by the time I had put my third or fourth project on LinkedIn, so what that means is every project that you work on, you're going to have to present as if it was a business case. So I had the slideshow deck for it, and you can link right in on LinkedIn under activities in whatever job you're in you can put in examples of your work. Now, of course, at most companies, you can't do that because of NDAs. So this was really great that you get to share. And again, the more like juicy, meaty content that you get onto that LinkedIn or on a personal blog, they also made us keep a personal blog, by the way, on anything like that is going to just light you up on the internet and be of real interest to recruiters. So a Spotify contact, member of their talent acquisition team, did reach out to me later on in the process. And we just started up a conversation. I was very, very lucky and just so blessed that they were interested in me. I felt very special, especially coming off of, it was really a hard experience leaving my former job. So that was just kind of a full 180 and validation of how far I'd come in a short 3 months.
What a beautiful story. And it's definitely not luck. You did so much hard work doing these projects, doing the boot camp, putting yourself out there, maintaining your network, keeping relationships going, building new relationships. I mean, that's all a lot of work. And then, what an amazing story that this led to where you're at today. Now, talk to us about the hip hop theme, how this plays a role in all of this.
So this is where it gets really fun. So Medus did do a write-up on me. That's true. Right after I started at Spotify, they were like, hey, we want to do some profiles of alumni and see how they're doing. And it's just, I guess, actually a little bit coincidental how nicely this wraps up in a ribbon. But my final project at Spotify, at Medus, was a project on hip hop and using data science, of course. So one thing where this idea kind of sprung from was I'm a huge fan of Nicki Minaj. And one particular thing about Nicki is that while she's a great artist on her own right, what really makes her top the charts is when she's featured on another artist's song. And she said it before herself, like any song that she goes on immediately goes to the top of the chart. And I thought that this was so cool that she's such a collaborative artist in that sense. But what did make it difficult was that it's harder for me to find her body of work. And I started noticing as well that if you listen to a lot of hip hop songs, do you know this, at the beginning when it kind of has a signature, mustard on the beat, or yeah. I don't know what the other one.
Right. And sometimes the DJ will have, or the
DJ
producer will have their own little tag, their audio tag.
London on the track or whatever. So I heard these little like buzzwords, and I'm like, what is that? And that, of course, is the producer or the DJ who remixed it or had some touch on it. But other than that, those little things in the beginning, there's no credits on Spotify. We don't have the album liner notes anymore. And I was like,
That's right.
Gee whiz, what if we could create some kind of playlist style or album style thing that instead of being focused on the main artist was not just the producer's work, but a related network of artists and producers and songwriters who have been in contact with each other, or even have maybe just a similar sound or influence. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the website genius.com.
Oh yeah, I'm on there all the time. I love looking at lyrics.
Yeah, so what it is for those of you who don't know, it's a kind of a lyric website, but it's so much more than that, because you can go on, and if you ever are what did they just say? Or what is that reference to that hip hop song? I'm not so hip with the culture myself. And I'll be like, what is this club that they're talking about? Or some street in LA or something. I just don't even know these things. So you can go in, and that actually has the metadata behind each track, as well as when it's referencing someone, it'll say what this is a sample of in a Kanye beat. If it's saying, I didn't realize that. So yeah, so Kanye will sample these amazing jazz and soul musicians from eras earlier, and linking back to those was really cool too. So I scraped that site and gathered just point by point different tracks that were related to each other. And then I kind of created a filtered list. I put it all in a database, and I used, I believe, TF-IDF to filter I had way too many features because I kind of created this huge matrix of all of the artists by all of the tracks. And I wanted to just sum that down.
Love that.
And so then from there, you can just kind of, I took like a pairwise dot product. So that would mean like just looking at how close are each of these vectors in the space of all of the vectors in that matrix. And that would give us kind of a representation of how close these songs are to each other. Coincidentally, this actually isn't too far away from what Spotify uses for Discover Weekly. Although instead of using artists on the same track, are the tracks being used on a lot of playlists by people. So do people who create playlists with Nicki Minaj put Cardi B on a lot too. And then I played around. I made some apps of like, okay, let's generate a playlist, put it in Rihanna, Julia, Nicki. It was just fun. So yeah,
that is so cool. Shout out to Spotify for keeping me up to date on good music. I love Discover Weekly and all the recommended tracks. And you're so right about, I love your approach of not just looking at trying to find all the artists in every single album, because that can be a chore. And great, thankfully with Spotify, you can like quickly do that. But like to your point about the producers, the people doing the music mixing, like all those other attributes that you're not necessarily thinking about as a listener necessarily, but all that like plays a huge role in whether you're going to like something.
Totally. And shout out to the Spotify team that I work on now. You can actually go to a track, and if you click into the three dots, you have to swipe through the list a little bit, but you can click on show credits now. So for those of us who missed the liner notes and want to see the full production credits, it's there finally, which is great. It's a huge win for artists who aren't performing artists, but in that entertainment industry, and really play a huge role. Songwriters, producers, remixers. I think they're so undercredited and just the secret geniuses of a lot of production.
I love that. I mean, it's like kind of bringing back the liner notes. I loved, like back in the day, I'd go to Amoeba and like digging through albums and kind of like looking at the back and like who's on this, who's being sampled. Like that was always so much fun. And you're kind of bringing that movement back.
Yeah, in a sense. It's just so cool that now that we do have the data, and now we can sort it in any way we want, cut it in any way we want. We can look at it from the producer angle, or look at it from the songwriter angle, or kind of blend, like, how often have these two collaborated? We know Max Martin, for those of you who are in the music industry, that name should ring a bell. For a lot of us who are just more casual listeners, Max Martin wrote Baby One More Time. He collaborated with Backstreet Boys, Madonna. I mean, like any top artist that you can think of in the last 20 years, Max Martin is a prolific songwriter. So to see, who has he collaborated with in addition to cutting with by any other artist, that's a cool dimension that you wouldn't have thought of normally.
Yeah, and also thinking about just how like the sounds within different eras, because that's also an impact too, whether you're going to like something, because a certain producer, DJ, mixer might be producing a certain way within a certain period of time and then switch it up. And evolution will have an impact. Like there's certain people, like I find like there's a lot of artists that I liked when I was in high school, and those albums, like I'm thinking of like even outside hip hop, like Death Cab for Cutie.
Yeah.
Like during my high school years, there was like, 3 or 4 albums that I just fell in love with. And then like I move on, go to college, and then other stuff life happens, right? I still go back to like that period, which was very unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and this goes back to the old, I miss the old Kanye line. And for me, that really rings true. I have a 3 or 4, 5 album Kanye period. And I think he still is, a genius of production. Yeah. But there are certain parts that I found super, super emotional, and people have an attachment during different periods of their life to different parts of an artist's life and an artist's career trajectory. Yeah, I think some of the most amazing things, and this is some dimension that we kind of touched on but haven't really explored, is the idea of looping in different generations and sampling. And that's such a huge story. That's a component of hip hop. Being a really expert producer means that you can draw on the influences of history and where they've come from, not just other rappers and making kind of references to other raps, but also, again, from other genres, from soul, from R&B and jazz. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this genre specifically.
That's so true. I just was reading through, Questlove has a book on creativity that came out, and he talks about like that diversity in music and how he's always going back to the days of digging through crates. Like he's doing that digitally now, like looking for samples, looking for different sounds. Because when he's asked to be a DJ at an event, like he's actually creating an audio story. Like he's very intentional about every sound, even though sometimes you're listening, you're like, oh, that, you're just thinking that he's just doing it on the fly. Like he's very intentional about like having a certain arc, a certain audio story, and he'll throw in, like he talked about how for whatever reason he wanted to throw in like the Golden Girls like intro music from the TV show from back in the day. And that's like intentional for one thing. And people are like, what's this? And all of a sudden he switches it up to something else. But like that creativity and like the sampling.
And it again brings us back to, if you ever watched the Golden Girls growing up, like it instantly puts you back in that place. And you're like, I wasn't expecting that here, but that's actually cool, And I think that's what it means to be a real genius MC, is having that just moment that how to combine the traditional, the hi-hats, the claps, the whatever, and layer on top of that these cultural references and moments that you're introducing it to a new generation as well. So for some people it's nostalgic, and for some people it's like, if that's the first they've heard of it. My favorite example is a lot of kids, I wonder if this is true, on Nicki Minaj's ridiculous Anaconda obviously starts with the amazing one-hit wonder Baby Got Back, which I think is just pure rap comedy. Like it's brilliant comedy. But for anyone who doesn't know Baby Got Back, I actually have a friend who's from Turkey, and she just was never familiar with that song. So she was like, what is going on? And then for us who have heard it before, we're like, oh man, that's a blast from the past. So I think that's the fun of it, is it can reintroduce and then introduce new fans and old fans.
That is so true. Like, especially like for those who are newer to hip hop or certain types of music and you don't know the history, like you might hear something new, but it's like calling you back to like something from the old school that's really, really good. And that's where like liner notes can be really, really helpful, because then it's like, no, this is a shout out. They're calling back a sample on something Run DMC did or Beastie Boys did from back in the day.
Exactly. And yeah, that's exactly what Genius does for me is, I'm a 90s baby. So I wasn't originally listening to those, Biggie, Nas, like all of those great guys, like back in the day. I was in diapers, but now I'll be like, damn, run that line back. And I look at it and I find out it's not Nicki Minaj's or Kanye or Drake's genius at all. It's really either a complete callback to or a twist on something that has been done. And I think that's so great. Yeah,
I'm like, so I'm glad you mentioned Genius, because I'm on Rap Genius like all the time. Because when you start to listen to like your favorite MCs and you really start to look at the rhymes, the metaphors, the wordplay, and you see how complex it is. Because sometimes when you listen to a song on the radio or whatever, it just sounds really good. You like the rhyming. But it's not until you actually like see what the community is calling out on these lines. Like, no. This little wordplay here is referencing something that happened 20 years ago, or referencing a line from, let's just say, I don't know, salt and pepper or whatever. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like all these, like there's like layers and layers, and sometimes it takes like rap genius to help you like realize like how complex this wordplay is, and then you're like really impressed on another level. Like not only does it sound good, the rap is really cold, but then it's like this has got layers to it. The meaning is on so many different levels.
That's exactly it. And to have those skills in so many dimensions, to be the lyrical poet. I mean, sometimes I say to my friends who don't enjoy rap, like, you can just take out the music, don't listen to it, just read it as a poem.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go through it that way, maybe you can catch some of the meaning more because you're not hearing it. You can actually read it out and see, oh, if I say that out loud, that's said back an entirely different way. It takes on another meaning. I think that's so cool. And then you layer on top of it, of course, the beats and the producer's flair to it, and then just the way that it's spoken out is just so beautiful that I think it's really so many levels, like you said.
And before we go, I have so I love supporting local artists, and there's a lot of folks in the hip hop community where I live, and I always go to their shows. And I was wondering, like, your advice for those in hip hop. We've been talking about advice for data scientists, advice for just working in business, but for those musicians, for those artists who are trying to get more recognized for their work, and knowing about how these days, like people are going to discover you on Spotify and other apps, like what are things that maybe they can do to help get more visibility for their music?
Totally. I think as far as Spotify goes, I can try my best to represent what options we have, but there's of course many avenues, and like anything, like data science, it's all about the hustle, right? So definitely, like if you're an artist, try to book those live shows, try to get out in your community and just perform as much as you can, get in the studio when you can, find that creativity. In terms of boosting your music and reaching your audience, we actually have a really great platform that I work on, which is the artists.spotify.com. So you could go in, you can view your listener stats, you can see where are your listeners, like where's your biggest listening community if you want to plan your tour that way. It might give you some actual data and insights on how to best reach that audience. On top of that, I would say definitely like making playlists yourself. If you mix in some of your favorite influences, maybe some bigger artists, and with some of your new music, get people who are already fans of things that you think are similar to you, then they might get interested in you as well. Just always just keep releasing music, keep on the grind, because once people like what you are putting out, they're going to be hungry for more content.
That's really, really good advice. And I think just like continuing to have a diverse like music style where you're bringing in samples, I mean, adding to your liner notes is going to help you get even more possible visibility.
Absolutely. But make sure that you get permission and copyright. More sampling, anything. There's a lot of great free stuff out there, so start with that.
No doubt, for sure. Keep it legal.
I have to say that.
Emily, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So cool hearing your passion for data science and how it helped to lead to the work you're doing now. And it's so cool that you're doing two things that you love, like working in music, helping artists, and then doing data science.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
For those that want to connect with you, where is the best place to go?
I can say I'm not super active on Twitter. I have one. It's at M Hough-Kovacs. So I'll spell that. It's E-M Hough-Kovacs, Hough-Kovacs. But I think another great place to start, and I think it probably links to all of my social, would be my personal blog, which I was mentioning before. So that's Emily-HK.com.
I love that's actually a good hip hop name.
Yeah,
Emily HK. So check it out, guys. EmilyHK.com. And also, I'm going to have a blog up with Emily's bio, links to her on LinkedIn where you can follow her, and also links to her blog and other social profiles. And the short URL to get to that blog post is just ex.pn/hip-hop. That's ex.pn/hip-hop. And that will bring you over to the video, the podcast episode, and also all of her social profiles so you can follow her. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
All right, everybody, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. Take care.